Hello, and welcome to Season 7, Episode 1 of the Dualistic Unity podcast. I'm really excited to be back. Admittedly, it's been a while since our last podcast episode. It's been several months. We've done a lot of stuff in the interim, including write a book. And I'm excited about the book because throughout the podcast, throughout 6 seasons, I really was doing my best to try and make the conversation more cohesive. I wanted to make the conversation easy to follow as much as possible, but of course, as conversations go, you tend to meander back and forth a lot. And in seasons 1 and 2, although we very much had a focus on the certain conversation, we did tend to delve into the community and into other things after that. And so the conversation, I think, got lost to some degree, and that's why we've had, I don't know, some consequences at some of our retreats in some of our groups with members of the quote unquote community, just because of the misunderstanding that the original point of the podcast is still the point. And so that's why I'm excited about this book, because this book really is more of a, and I hesitate to say structured, but more of an overhead view of what it is we've been talking about since season 1. And the way it reads makes it very easy to kind of take in what we're saying a bit at a time in a way that's applicable so you can practice it. And then that leads you to the next thing that we're talking about, as opposed to just going, I need to memorize as many of these quote unquote insights as possible. And that's what the point is. So the book really is a chance to explore this conversation from the ground up. And so I'm looking forward to talking about the book. The book, of course, is called Proof That You're God. It's available now on Amazon in print or ebook format. We're going to cover a little bit of what's in chapter 1, I think, in this episode, but we're also going to have workshops on the conversations within the book as we get closer to the summer. So do subscribe to our newsletter to keep on top of when those are coming out. But aside from that, it's good to be back. Amanda, Andrew, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Good to be back. It's been a ride, that's for sure. And I think getting into and promoting the book a little bit more is a great call because admittedly, it did become almost a lot about when it came to the community growing. I think there can be this convoluted approach that's about feeling better about yourself, like not feeling like you're so alone in maybe things that you're realizing or coming to. And I'll be the first to tell you that this, process, whatever lack of process is incredibly humbling. Like it's arguably the most humbling thing you can realize because it's not about feeling better about yourself. It's about accepting yourself as you are wholeheartedly and not making it about you. Like that's where the freedom comes in. And, from my experience, like I've been, been at this for, since we started. And I came from a spot that was, kind of that, we talked about that tree in a dome analogy and came from that spot and almost like didn't want to necessarily admit it to myself. And as you start to experience more, you realize that it's not about you so much. And it's not that you start experiencing more and you have to focus on different things or trying to build yourself up, but that can become more of a draw. And I think that's above all else. I'll just leave my opening remarks at this that I didn't want to admit to myself that I was super insecure and riddled with a lot of anxiety deep down. And like, I didn't want to talk about that on the podcast because I wanted to feel good about myself. Like I'd overcome certain things. And I started to build this idea that if I admitted that I was insecure, that I was afraid, that I was petrified of, standing on my own, putting myself out there, having an opinion for myself, having thoughts for myself, that I was a fraud in a sense because I was talking like, I had social media and whatnot. Whereas that's the most connective thing. What I've realized more recently is that's what connects us, that everyone's insecure. Everyone has their deeper stuff. And I think as you start to rewrite your story, as chapter 1 talks about, look at the things, it's not through building yourself or building yourself up. It's about looking at the ways that you're thinking about yourself and being willing to question those, understanding that the story that you're telling yourself isn't true, whether you're feeling really good or feeling really bad about yourself. Like that's not you, and that allows for the change to happen. So yeah, it's it's good to be back. There's a lot more that I've learned over the last few months, last few years, that I've had the chance to process a lot more recently, and so I'm excited to be back and being able to share more of the stuff.
Yeah, I am excited that the topic that we're going to be sharing, most of all during this episode is about the book because we took a break from the podcast to write this because at the end of season 6, the book wasn't finished. And so we've gotten a lot done. And chapter 1, rewriting your story is a lot easier to do when you don't think you're just that story, just that version. When you think that there's space, when you think that there's flexibility, when it doesn't need to just be one way. So I'm really glad that the book is just a continuation of the conversations we were having in the podcast, just like the podcast was just a continuation of the experiences we were having alone before all of this happened. So I think it's just more continuations, more extensions, more evolutions happening because the podcast was never meant to be an endpoint, just like this book is not meant to be an endpoint. It's just another continuation. And I'm curious more than anything to see what's happening and what could happen. And there's a little excitement that's pairing with that curiosity.
Well said. Absolutely. I think what I'm excited about the most is the title of the book really is the point. And I think it's very much the point that is easy to lose because it can be so uncomfortable. The podcast, this conversation, was never about being part of a group awakening. It was never about being a part of a community. It was never about connecting to other people, though all of those things certainly are and can be a byproduct of this conversation. The conversation is very much that you are God. Now, what you and God mean are really the question and the reason that we're having this conversation. It's the point of the book. But it is really important to recognize that this is about your journey, not our journey, not the journey of us as a species, though again, this contributes to that. But to truly put all of our attention into change, we have to focus on where change is happening to us, which is our life. And so this is not about how we are all in this together, though again, it kind of is. This is very much about you. What traps you? What limits you? How much is your choice and how much is a result of fear that you are not willing to look at? And that's why, in looking at your divinity, in looking at what it is to be God, it is so important to remember that your idea of God is not God. God is what is. And so if you are insecure, resisting that insecurity is resisting God. It's resisting yourself. It's in accepting your insecurity and accepting your fear and accepting the temptation to want to feel better than others that you truly are able to see those things as they arise and make a different choice. But it's through awareness of that as the source of that, and not through the lens that you are a victim or that it's being done to you or that it's something that you have to go through. You are going through yourself. And so all of this is a conversation in acceptance of what you are. And in accepting what you are and abandoning the illusions and the assumptions of what you think you are, you find connection. You find peace. You find all of the things that religion and spirituality labels as God or divinity existing here in you as the awareness of existence itself. And so I know that sounds like a lot, and I know it can seem very daunting, which is why we've been at this for 6 seasons. But in season 7, we really want to break this down in the same way that we break it down in the book. And so, as Amanda and Andrew have both said, the biggest part of this is just not knowing, being willing to accept parts of yourself, but not needing to judge them or determine that's bad for me. That's not something that should be happening. Just to look at yourself and then look at all the stories you tell yourself and how many of those stories are meant to just protect you, to make you feel certain, but are ultimately causing all of your frustration and your disappointment and the isolation and loneliness that you struggle with every day. And so, again, stoked to get back into this, stoked that we're returning to the point, as controversial as it is. And I know this because right now, of course, I've been digging back into the conversation about divinity, about God, about eternal life, about all of these things that we associate with the concept of God being just a virtue of existence itself. And it upsets people, but ultimately also sets you free if you're willing to accept it and accept that it's not satisfying. It's just freedom, which is an entirely different thing to feel.
Yeah. And it's a freedom from your assumptions, but it's something that you do. Like when your mind pops something up, an assumption about what's that, it's on you. You're like, yeah, but I don't know that. Yeah, but I don't know that. Yeah, but I don't know that. And what's happening and what you think is happening are never aligned. Like it can really, really, really seem like they are. And your assumptions about, what you have to go through or what you think should be happening or shouldn't be happening or what you think is happening are the same because you are not separate. Like as you start to, dig into these things, maybe about yourself, maybe let go of some stories, you get, I don't want to say closer to realizing things, but things can become very, very reflective of your assumptions. And if you're making it about you, remembering that it's not about you can help, I don't know, allow those things to subside. But I think just in general, like a lot of the things that as a world we're going through, whether you want to feel really good about yourself or not great about yourself, or even assuming things that you're going through, like they're they can be self-fulfilling prophecies. I don't want to say like a lot of the disorders or the things that people are diagnosed with are immediately reflective, but I think there's roles that we play. I think that's above all else is there's no matter what's happening, there's a role that you're playing in that, in either exacerbating that situation or being willing to question it, but that's being willing to question your sense of certainty, that sense of a guarantee. Because I can speak for myself, there's been, situations where I was sure that I was gonna die. Like my reality was reflecting that. People were saying things that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is gonna happen. And because I didn't want to take a second and really it wasn't until I was like, yeah, but maybe not. Maybe it seems like it, but maybe not. Maybe not. And hell, I like for anyone who thinks they've gone crazy with stuff, like I thought I was getting turned into AI at one point. And like there were things that were reflecting in my environment that like I was convinced were happening. And it seemed like it because it was reflective. And you have to be willing to be like, yeah, but I don't know what's actually happening in my environment right now. What's actually happening. And with whether it's fears or desires or whatever it is, they pop up. They pop up and it's like there's a glimmer sometimes of it. And then if that becomes your focus, and it's really attention, if your attention goes to that over attention over the experience that you're having, one of the two, wherever that attention goes, which is on you, expands. And so if there's a glimmer of something like, oh, maybe that, yeah, but I don't know that, immediately goes like kind of subsides. But if you're like, oh my gosh, wait, yeah, and then you start looking into things, it's like it grows. But if it's like, yeah, but I don't know that, all of a sudden the attention of where you're at grows, and they can be very, very reflective and intense. And it's the same with judgment. I think that's probably a more common one. You think everyone's judging you. That's judgmental on you. And that's reflective of where you're at. Like you think people are judging you. You're judging them as being judgmental. You don't know. You don't know. Even the looks, you get a bunch of looks. It's like you notice certain things. So I think that along with this conversation, it's not about having the right words. It's about recognizing that your reality comes from you. And there is an immediate, intricate, irrevocable, inseparable role that you play in your experience. And that's your responsibility is to kind of keep that in check and just recognize that you're still in uncertainty every single moment, no matter how crazy those thoughts may seem, you still don't know, and it's never going to be that. And I think that's a big component in the experience of, being God is recognizing that responsibility is on you.
Your life is the contribution. I used to always think about what was I contributing, because I was always thinking about what was I getting. It was always such a transactional thing. And so I was always thinking about what was my contribution? Was I contributing something like a leader? Was I being a follower? What was I contributing? And the other day I was just thinking about how my life is the contribution. It is both the experience and the contribution. And but it's not really a contribution, and it doesn't really feel like I'm not really adding, but in some way I am contributing. And somehow that feels like two different things. Adding doesn't feel like the contribution because I'm not adding to the wholeness. Existence already is here. We can switch out existence for God. I don't think of God as this separate outside of life, outside of everything, outside of existence kind of puppeteer that's orchestrating everything. I think of God as just another word for existence, for everything that is. Things just are what they are. And you were saying, Andrew, about how, all of a sudden your life was reflecting that thought back to you. And it's like life isn't, I mean, things just are what they are, right? You think someone's looking at you and that look is a judgment, and that look is just a look. Things just are what they are. But then the appearance of things changes as I paint it with my perspective paintbrush. Things just are what they are, but if I'm painting with my perspective. It's like life, the reflection is me. All I'm seeing is me, but the me, that definition can change based on where the focus is. And so sometimes it feels like the definition of God or me or existence is very small. And sometimes it feels like it's super expansive. And yet both of those things are not true in the way that they feel. And yet letting go of them is not as bad as I think after I actually let go. Before letting go, you feel like letting go is losing something. But after you let go, that moment feels incredibly full. It feels incredibly whole and clear, but nothing's changed. The only thing that's really changing is just the perspective. And that's not, it's just that it's so hard to put things into words, but the feelings are what can be focused on more. Because as much as I can share different words, I'm never going to be able to convey the words that truly embody the feeling that I experienced in the same way that you could never. But it's so worthy of interest and attention, and it's worthy of discussion. It's just not worthy to stand on for too long. So when I find myself standing for too long, I feel more nervous. I feel scared. I feel uncertain. But when things start moving, not really me, but when things feel like they're in motion, it doesn't feel as scary anymore. And letting go doesn't feel like this cliff, because at a cliff, you'd have to be standing still to jump off of it, wouldn't you? But if you're always in motion, how often are you going to feel like you're at the cliff's edge?
There's a quote that we share in chapter 1 that says this eloquently. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. And so this is often the problem that we have is that we will feel that nothing is changing in our life when it is in fact the idea of ourself that we're clinging to so hard that we're not changing, or at least that we're not recognizing the change that is constant. And this is something that we discuss thoroughly in chapter 1, that the biggest insight behind all of this isn't to get rid of your story, but to stop assuming it's written in stone, to stop assuming that it is ever what you think it is for very long. because you are always in flux. You are always changing. There is always more influence. There is always the ability to see beyond the petty fears that are driven by your identity and your need for control. And in a moment, everything can change. And if you can just accept that, that doesn't mean you have to experience it right now. But how much of your struggle is the resistance to that simple fact? Things will change. We actually have expressions that we use all the time, like, this too shall pass. It's not that things are changing. Life is change, but we can hold on to concepts that don't change. And when we live through those concepts, we feel like nothing's changing. It's in letting go of the concept, or at least being willing to question the concept as truth, that we allow reality or ourselves to have the space and the fluidity to experience that change.
Absolutely. And I think that touches on that, because a lot of people, and especially in the spiritual world, they get focused on ego death or having an ego death or whatever. And it's like, what exactly do you mean by that? Because if it is just your sense of self, I think a lot of it, because as you grow up, through teenage years into your 20s, they say, the brain stops developing at 25. I think that's more that we get settled on a specific idea of ourself at 25. Like we've been through enough, kind of had some, dabbling, and at least people who go through, system, whatever, have some dabbling in the quote unquote real world, and they settle upon something. And so into your late 20s, maybe you start after that point, you start questioning that. And then is that really me? And I think where what we've been discussing right now is it's not this black and white thing. It's not that you have this perception, specific idea of yourself, and then it goes away and then it's gone. It's no, it shifts. So you could have, a quote unquote ego death like tons of times, and that's you changing. And it's, in a sense, talking about eternal life and death, birth and death, like if is that not death? If that's how we're focusing or where our attention goes when it's not on reality, which doesn't exist in time, then is death not just the shifting of different ideas? And so as you maintain, or not maintain, but try to maintain certain ideas, positive or negative, quite frankly, because if you're set on a certain idea that you're a piece of shit, someone comes around and says like, hey, I really appreciate that thing you just shared. You probably won't believe them because there's almost this satisfaction. And I think that's the satisfaction that you don't get in this conversation. There's a satisfaction in being correct. Like I want to know that how I see myself is how everyone else sees me. So even if, things start changing and someone recognizes something, like you almost won't want to see that. Like I've been in points in my life where I've been so sure that I'm a piece of shit or that I'm great that I didn't want to see either one. Like someone gives me a compliment and I've straight up like I've been had so far up my ass that I've been like, no, no, I think I'd said like, no, you're lying, like to them. And they're like, what the fuck? And that's such an invalidation of anything outside of yourself. And so the shifting, the rewriting of the story that, we talk about in chapter one, it's the it's the willingness to be unsure. And that's how you can change. And the amount of change that you experience, at least when it comes to how you see yourself, changes all of reality, your experience. And the less sure you become of it, the more you allow it to continue to change. And you can go into situations unsure, and like that's freedom right there. It's a self-induced thing. The prison versus the freedom is that sense of certainty, that sense of a guarantee, that sense of, oh, I can, if we go to karaoke plenty, and when someone's like, oh, I don't sing karaoke. I don't do that. I'm not a singer. I'm not a good singer. It's like they're so sure that they won't even step in and see. And it's like you don't know that. You're not sure. And a good singer to who? Why does that matter? What is there to accomplish from that? Like what are you gonna get from doing it or not doing it? Like where does that end? But it can feel almost like stepping into those situations where you feel sure, like it is a death. It is a death of that certainty. And so that fear of death can come on a daily basis. And it's not just, end of life sort of thing. It's being willing to admit uncertainty, admit that you don't know, admit that, your sense of certainty, control, all of that is not the truth. It never has been, and it never will be. And in that spot, it's untethered. It cannot feel as safe, maybe, but safe to what? Safe to, your sense of certainty, your sense of, you know, control of a guarantee, which has never existed.
Certainty is just uncertainty in a mask. It's a facade. It's a lie. It's never true. It's never true. I swear I have put in so many good planning hours, like mad scientist up 3 in the morning, papers taped to the wall, papers all over, feeling brilliant, feeling like I've got it, I figured it out, I have solved the mystery of life. And it never worked. The plans never worked. But they felt great. And I felt so sure and I felt confident. And I walked out there and I was like, yeah, I've got it. And, all those plans that felt so sure and were treated as such. They never turned out the way that I intended them to. And yet I am so grateful that I tried so hard to be so sure. And, because there is little doubt, there's always when you're learning and unlearning habits, those things don't just happen in a moment, I have put in years into building my thoughts, into building my identities, into trying different ones out. And so I don't expect myself to not feel that gravitational pull back to those habits, back to that feeling of certainty, the satisfaction of certainty, and that is still there. And I'm grateful that it's there because it's a great reminder, that I'm not always focused on here and now. And that adds depth to my here and now. And it adds so much. And I feel like it's okay that it's all there. I don't expect myself to just be all here or all there. And it seems more like a dance than a march from here to there. It feels like I dance between here and there in a moment to moment. Sometimes I will feel so dialed in, and then sometimes I feel like I am drifting off into the fucking deep space of thought. Because I can't even say it's a deep space, like deep space mind. It feels like I'm deep in the thought. And it feels like it's like it would take such a distance to get back to here. And yet the experience is always here, And so it just feels like certainty is just uncertainty in a mask. And it feels like a game and a cruel joke sometimes, but I love Charlie Chaplin, his quote that he was saying that, all lives are, a tragedy up close and a comedy from afar. And that seems to be, you know, okay with me. I'm okay laughing and I'm okay crying and I'm okay crying about the laughing and laughing about the crying because it's all here. And that's what it is, and sometimes I will say that's okay. And sometimes I will say, I will ask myself why, or not ask myself, but I would just ask the question why, and it's all here. It's worthy of interest. It's worthy of exploring, and it's worthy of not looking into, in every single moment because I appreciate more and more the variety and depth of what the moment can offer, although I never will be able to predict what it's going to offer or what it's going to give me, but I'm open to what's always being offered.
It's kind of a cruel joke that we can develop tools in order to give ourselves a direction that we know is positive, but then the tool itself can become an attachment that derails that direction. For example, the idea of being authentic. We talk about all of this. Don't settle on an idea of yourself, and you will find your authentic self. And suddenly we're trying to be an authentic self. Suddenly we're changing our responses in order to be more authentic. And we're beating ourselves up when we don't feel that we've been authentic. Like if we're in a conversation and we don't immediately speak our mind, I'm not being authentic. It's like, no, you are. You're being authentically quiet. You're being authentically introverted. These are things that are authentic and that you should stop judging. But you can't stop judging as long as you have an idea of authentic that is not the reality. And this is the case with everything, whether it be enlightened, whether it be being yourself. As soon as that becomes an idea, it's no longer the reality that the idea was meant to point to. And it can become an obsession because it gives you a sense of control. Now I know what I'm trying to be or where I'm trying to go. I know that when I get there, things are going to be better. And we have all of these concepts around this concept because now we have control. And it really is understanding that we are always in the process of expanding our context and expanding our understanding. And as long as that's true, any single concept that we settle on, any idea, is always going to be the result of what understanding we have up until that point. But if we settle on the idea, then we totally disregard any further understanding later because it would invalidate the idea that now gives us a sense of comfort, a sense of false certainty, and a sense of control. And so that's why it's important to remember that the thing that you're looking for is the thing that you are. It's your judgments and your ideas about that thing that are stopping you from truly appreciating it and learning from it. And that's really all we're learning. Accept what you are, and you will start to remove a lot of the distorted perspectives of what that thing is, which reveals more and more of what's already there. And that's what sets you free. It's not trying to be something. It's recognizing that the only reason you don't already feel whole is because you've torn yourself apart.
Yeah, it really is going through it. It's going through the feeling, like insecurity, like being quiet. Being quiet, that was growing up, that was my big one. And I didn't realize until, into my 20s that the reason that I struggled, especially in high school, I almost didn't say anything. That was how I maintained control in a sense, which I realized much further on. I didn't know that when I was, 16, being like, I'm maintaining control through not involving myself in this situation. Was the whole time I was telling myself that I was doing something wrong. Being quiet was wrong, was bad as I kept doing. So it kept perpetuating the fucking cycle. And it's not until, and that goes for anything you assume about yourself, this, that, whatever it may be, however you act, however you interact. And as soon as you're like, it's okay to do that and accept whatever that experience is. I'm not saying it happens immediately. I'm not saying it happens super quickly, but it almost begins a shift because it's on you. Again, the responsibility is on you. No one's going to come around and when you're being quiet and feeling insecure about it, or being super talkative and feeling insecure about it, or doing whatever, no one's going to come around and be like, "Hey, it's okay that you're doing this." Or I know you feel like you're doing something because no one really knows because half the people probably don't even notice that you're acting a certain way, but you certainly will notice yourself and assume that most of the time we had just assume that we're doing something wrong, doing something incorrect because there's no right thing because there's so many things you can do and based on how you're brought up or based on how you see certain things, there's very deeply ingrained things that you may not even recognize or realize. And so it's in those moments where you're like, I'm feeling really insecure. I'm feeling like I'm doing everything wrong. Maybe I'm not. Maybe how I'm acting right now is totally okay. And again, it's the Chinese finger puzzle. It's like the more you're like, I gotta take these courses, I gotta take these confidence courses and speaking courses and blah blah blah, and like how to not be insecure. You want a quicker route or a route that's actually gonna work and not just build bullshit on top of those things is just tell yourself it's okay to be insecure. It's okay to be quiet. It's okay to mess everything up. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to put myself out there and not do a great job. Like that, again, it doesn't change things right away. necessarily, but it at least begins the process and over. And then you can start to do things because it's not about when you start to realize it's not about accomplishing things when you start to look at those realizations. Oh, maybe it's not about getting to the next thing. Maybe it's not about improving. Maybe it is just about experiencing things. Like there is no point to get to. There is no thing in the future that's going to free you. There's no thing in the future that's going to make you better. There's no thing in the future that's going to make you worse. You can fuck yourself up with a lot of assumptions, absolutely, but there's no thing down the road that does it. It's in this moment. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And it's not about doing anything well, even because doing it well over and over and getting better even doesn't eventually get you to a point that you're feeling better than you are now. Like those points don't exist. And so in that experience, it's really just like, okay, I'm feeling this. Okay, and I accept that, or am I trying to run from that? And if you run from that, then it's just distraction and it's still there. That's the thing, is it's still there. And so in those moments where you're feeling like you're doing everything wrong, in those weeks where you feel like everything's going to shit, it's remembering that like I don't know. And that's what begins the change. It's not digging deeper into it until someone comes and saves you, until Jesus comes back from the fucking for the second coming. It's not those points. It's on you. It's on you to not even accept, I mean, accept yourself, sure, but be willing to admit that you don't know. Be willing to admit that I assume that I'm doing something wrong. I assume that the way I'm acting right now is incorrect, but maybe I don't know. And that then opens things up to at least see a slightly different perspective of yourself because the one you're focused on, it's not correct. However correct you may seem, however much in your environment is reflecting that, it's not the truth, and it's not for sure. And yeah, you don't know. You don't know.
That's actually a really good way of putting it. Accept who you are, not who you think you are. When you're thinking about yourself, that's very much the result of your assumptions and your judgment and everything that you think you know up until that point. But that's not what you are. So if you're feeling confused, don't rely on the thought that you know what's going on. Just be confused.
Although you're not right, you're also not wrong. And I think that's, at least in my own experience, what felt like the greatest barrier to admitting that I didn't know was that I didn't want to be wrong. I was more okay with not being right than I was with being wrong because it felt like there would be nowhere to go from there. Like I'm wrong and that's it. It's a dead end. But being wrong isn't a dead end in the same way that being right isn't a highway to satisfactionville, where that's you're always satisfied. No one's upset, no one goes without, everyone gets exactly what they want, and no one ever has to be wrong. It's like that's not as satisfying as you'd even want it to be. And so not knowing is not as scary as I made it out to be, because not knowing is full of potential. In that space of uncertainty, there is no expectation, there is no guarantee because nothing is predictable. You couldn't know in that space of uncertainty, you couldn't know anything because if you knew it, then it wouldn't be a space of uncertainty, right? But that's what makes it so magnificent is that it is nothing. It's nothing but potential. That's all that could be an uncertainty. And so that's what makes uncertainty exciting and less scary, is that it's not a monster, it's not a savior, it's nothing. It's just potential. It's just raw material that I get to shape. And the way that I shape raw material is through the expectation of what I can do or through the limitation of what I think I can't do. And none of that is set in stone. And that feels way more flexible in the same way that the story feels way more flexible and rewriting the story feels way more possible. And then ideas start to spring to life. And I'm not bringing an idea to life, but the idea has space to grow. And it doesn't have that same rigid structure of my prediction of what I think needs to happen. And so Not knowing is not as bad as I thought, or is not as scary as I wanted it to be, because I treated that thought or that idea or that concept like it was the only way. And it's just one way, not a bad way, not a right way, not a wrong way. It's just a way. And I can explore any way for as long as I decide. And so the choice seems way more flexible, just and then everything else just starts to reflect that perspective. But it's not set in stone either. And so it's just as easy for me to feel like the choice is cemented and a weight as easily as the choice can feel light as a feather.
That's well said. It's funny how often we don't realize that the reason we feel limited is because we only think about what we want. We never think about anything other than what we want. We want change, but only change that we want. And so we never actually let go of the wanting a certain end result. And so we never actually experience the change that would be there without that tunnel vision. And I know that all of this, as we talk about it, can again seem very overwhelming. Like there's a lot here, but on the other hand, it's also very simple. That doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can do that help you apply this stuff, get it a little bit deeper, get a better look at some of the things that you're holding on to that maybe you weren't prepared to look at before. In fact, in chapter 1 of our book, there are numerous exercises and reflection points that will give you the opportunity to do just that. So we are going to wrap up this episode. It's been a lot of fun. It's good to be back. Do remember that we still hold our Patreon group Zooms every Sunday. So if you'd like to join us and have a conversation, please take advantage of that opportunity to come and shoot the breeze with us. You can talk about the book, you can talk about your life, you can talk to other people who are going through a lot of the same thing. But I want to stress this is about you. Don't come to the groups, don't come to the retreats looking for people to support you, looking for a community to validate you. Move beyond the need for those things, and you will get more out of this conversation and this podcast and your journey as a whole. But that said, that's it for me. Do check out the book. Proof That Your God is available on Amazon in digital or print format. It's good to be back. We'll see you in a group.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining.